Simply to say "dead man walking" is sufficient to introduce Sister Helen Prejean. Sister is from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and is a sister of St. Joseph. Sister Helen began her prison ministry in 1981 when she dedicated her life to the poor of New Orleans. While living in the St. Thomas Housing Project, Sister became pen pals with Patrick Saunier, the convicted killer of 2 teenagers, sentenced to die in the electric chair of Louisiana's Angola State Prison. Upon Saunier's request, Sister Helen repeatedly visited him as his spiritual advisor. In doing so, her eyes were opened to the Louisiana execution process. Sister Helen turned her experiences into a book that made the 1994 American Library Associates Notable Book List. Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States, was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for 31 weeks. It is also an international bestseller and has been translated into 10 different languages. In January 1996, the book was developed into a major motion picture starring Susan Sarandon as Sister Helen and Sean Penn as the death row inmate Robert Lee Willis. In 2000, Dead Man Walking was turned into an opera, and next year that opera will be produced at the Kennedy Center here in Washington. 15 years after beginning her crusade, Sister Helen has witnessed 5 executions in Louisiana, and today educates the public about the death penalty by lecturing, organizing, and writing, and that is why Sister Helen is here with us tonight. Following her presentation, Sister Helen will have a book signing outside of the Crypt Church. We invite you to join us afterward to meet Sister Helen, but right now, please welcome Sister Helen Prejean.
To sing the mercies of God in our own lives, in our own flesh and blood, in our own awakenings, in our own struggles. And that's what I do with you today in the sharing of our faith with each other. God's mercy awakens us like the petals of a rose when we're ready. God wakes us up, and then we try to follow. I've been experiencing God's mercy from the time of my birth to a really beautiful, good Catholic family in Louisiana, going to Mass at Our Lady of Mercy Church, saying the rosary every day, even though sometimes at night when we're doing a family rosary, there was a lot of nodding off, but we persisted. Holy Mary, Mother of God, through the mysteries of Christ's life, growing up as a young Catholic girl, being taught by great nuns, Sisters of St. Joseph in Baton Rouge, knowing I wanted to be 2 things. I wanted to be a mystic and be close to God and know how to pray, and I wanted to be a teacher. And so I joined the Sisters of St. Joseph, and my life began to unfold there. I'm writing a book now, my 3rd book actually, and it's called River of Fire. And it's this journey of going to prison and going to a person on death row and actually being with them when they're executed. And that's been another way of experiencing God's mercy in those who are the most despised, the most condemned, treated like disposable human waste, hated by society to such an extent that they are told, in not only in speech but in practice, we must kill you in order for our society to continue to be safe. I will, in the book River of Fire, which tells of my spiritual journey going to death row, it has a prelude in it. The prelude goes like this. They killed a man with fire one night. They strapped him in a wooden chair and pumped electricity through his body until he was dead. His killing was a legal act because he had killed. No religious leaders protested the killing that night, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And what I saw set my soul on fire, a fire that burns in me still. And now here's an account of how I came to be in the killing chamber that night and the spiritual currents of mercy that brought me there. First of all, waking up is mercy, because we don't come to awakening of God's grace and the call of God's Spirit in our life in a deeper way, except through God's mercy. And so that awakening to justice, that awakening of moving from the suburbs, of moving from the people I loved in Cabrini Parish, where I'd been the director of religious education, where I had taught 7th and 8th grade in high school, where I taught English, where I taught religion. Everybody deserves our love. Everyone deserves our service. But I didn't get it about justice, social justice, the poor, the gospel of social justice. And that awakening was pure grace. And that awakening I tell you about in the beginning of Dead Man Walking. And that's what brought me to African American people to sit at their feet and learn from them in the St. Thomas housing projects in New Orleans. We all have our inner cities. We all have our place where our poor people are. I'd never been there. I thought if people feel called to go serve the poor, let them go there. But I'm doing what I feel God wants me to do. And that awakening, and when I went to African American people whom I had only known personally as our servants when I was growing up in Baton Rouge, it was the days of Jim Crow, arch segregation. Even in Sacred Heart Church, African American people had to sit way over in a special section, not with the white people. And it was culture. And it was, I never questioned it. It's just the way we do things. And being told as a child, honey, it's better that the races stay separate, otherwise, so there won't be any fighting. They like to be with their own kind. We like to be with our own kind. So there was that separation. So we have a Pope now calling us to a gospel of encounter, to get out there, to go. Prison's part of that, and that's what happened with me. So first it was being immersed and taught by poor people, and then it was getting the invitation to write a man on death row. This was in the early 80s, and we hadn't executed anybody in Louisiana in over 20 years. I never dreamed when I wrote that letter to the man on death row that he was going to be executed, much less that I would be there. But God's grace unfolds unto us. It's a step at a time, the gentleness of God's Spirit with us, taking us a step at a time. Write a letter. Then he writes back. And when he writes back, there's an encounter. And it's in that encounter that God's grace is present. And so I was with him when he was executed. And so I found out what was his crime. And so the next experience, deep experience of God's loving mercy is going to be with the victims' families. They wake up on a Friday morning in November in 1977, and it's an ordinary day. A mama and a daddy with their son, a mama and a daddy with their daughter. And their daughter, Loretta, is going to go with her boyfriend, David. And they're going to go to a Catholic high homecoming football game that night. And the last they see them alive is standing in the kitchen before they leave to go to the football game. And then the sheriff's deputy is at the door the next day for the fathers to come with them to identify their children in the morgue. And their journey begins. And at first, when I heard what Pat Saunier and his brother had done, this unspeakable murder of killing these 2 teenage kids in cold blood, I didn't know what I was called to do with the victims' families, because I figured, well, I'm the spiritual advisor to the 2 men who killed their kids. They're not going to want to see me. I'm going to be the last person they want to see. It was cowardice. I stayed away. I didn't do anything. I didn't write him a note to just say, I'm so sorry about your son, so sorry about your child. Nothing. And I met them at the most polarized event you can imagine. It was a pardon board hearing right before Pat Saunier was executed, and you actually sign a book when you go into a pardon board hearing before a person's executed in Louisiana. This is the last event that perhaps there will be reasons seen by this commission of governors' appointees, perhaps to give clemency to this murderer about to die. And who's sitting in that room of the pardon board hearing? All the families of the victims, their relatives, their friends. They packed the room to be witnesses there to say, do not let this person receive mercy. This person killed innocent children and deserves justice, and we're here to see that justice is done. And that was when I met the mother and the father of the boy and girl who had been killed. And then the grace of God has a way of taking us. The girl's parents were very angry at me, and I did deserve their anger. I'd done it all wrong. The boy's father, Lloyd LeBon, he's the hero of Dead Man Walking. I'm not the hero. I'm the storyteller. And I made a bad mistake. But it was his journey. He said to me, Sister Helen, all this time, you've been visiting those two brothers, and you never once came to see us. Sister, you can't believe the pressure we're under with this death penalty thing. And in Louisiana, the death penalty was big. It still has been big. The Deep South states that practice slavery do 78% of all executions. It's a deeply cultural Southern thing tied into race and poverty in a lot of ways. But this man is saying to me, Sister, where you been? And I said, Mr. LeBlanc, I'm so sorry. I didn't think you'd want to see me. And he took me then into his journey and into his heart and into his own story. He said, Sister, when I was saying to you, you can't believe the pressure we're under. He said, everybody was saying to me, Lloyd, you gotta be for the death penalty, or it'll look like you didn't love your boy. I mean, here you lost your son, the ultimate loss you could have, and you're not gonna ask for the ultimate penalty? What's wrong with you? And so he said, with all those people telling me that, and Sister, you weren't there for me either. He said, I went there. In my mind, in my heart, in my imagination, I pictured myself killing both those brothers in the electric chair, that the state would let me pull the switch, and I would see them suffer pain. I wanted them to have pain because of what happened to Eula, my wife, and Vicky, our daughter. They deserve pain because they gave pain. And then he said, I noticed what was happening to me. Because I've always been a kind person. I love to help people. I've been that way my whole life. My mom and daddy taught me that. And I was losing that. I was angry all the time. I was snapping at Eula and at my daughter. And then he put his hand out like this, and then I said, They killed our boy. But with God's grace, I'm not going to let them kill me. And he set his face to begin going down the road of forgiveness. And it's God's grace that enables us to do that. It was God's grace that enabled him to. And what I learned from him, he was the first victim's family along this road where I've met many, many people who have had their loved ones killed and who make their way to the place that Jesus has called us to. And the way he explained it to me was, they killed our boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And he was the first one to explain to me that what forgiveness is. He said, people think forgiveness is weak. Like forgiveness means, oh, you killed, but like I condone what you did. You killed my son, forgive and forget, it's okay. I could never condone it. We suffer David's death every time he has another birthday. He was only 17. But then he said, I didn't want that hate to overcome me. And with God's grace, the love in me has been preserved, and the kindness in me has been preserved. I met one victim's family one time, and he said, I was hating the person who killed my father and hating him. And it's like I was drinking poison, and I hope it killed him. So we have these witnesses among us of people who have been thrown in the fire, thrown in the crucible, lost their children, lost their father, lost their brother, and do not call for the retribution of they killed, therefore we killed them. And we need to look at our nation, at our government, at us. Imagine the promise of family, that if they wait 15 years, 10, 20, in time we'll summon you and you get to send a representative and watch as we kill the one who killed your loved one, and you get to watch that violence, and that is going to heal you. That's going to give you closure. It's the very opposite of mercy. It's eye for eye. Jesus is seldom quoted in this, where he said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye. Just to be here, to be a person of faith, to gather for Eucharist as we did today, and to be able to live our faith in a community of other faithful people trying to follow the way of Jesus. All of that is God's mercy to us. Another short story I want to tell you about, a story of mercy. It was about a priest, belonged to a religious order. And very early on, when he was young, he was made a superior. Later, he himself said, I was far too young to be given authority. And he became very righteous, very authoritarian. It was his way or the highway. And he always felt he had righteousness on his side. He knew what the rule of the order was. He knew what the teachings of the Catholic Church were. And he wouldn't let people depart from it at all. And he would get into terrible debates with the members of the community. He became a source of division in the community. So much so that the superior general of his order, when the division got to be so bad, in the rule book for this particular religious order, when they talk about leaders in the community, they said the worst thing that can happen with a leader is that they're divisive. They have the community turned against each other. And this particular person I'm talking about had a powerful personality. So people were either for him or against him. And so the division was so great in the community that they exiled him. Spirit General said, we're sending you over to this little town. It was like 400 miles away. They even censored his phone calls, because every time he'd call, he'd stir the pot again, and there'd be all kind of ruckus. So 2 years, he moved from a place of authority and esteem within the community to a place of exile where he's persona non grata. He's not even given a particular ministry. Just say Mass, don't cause trouble, don't call home. And then he got a summons from a friend of his who was an archbishop and knew he had the potential in him to be a leader of the gospel. And he summoned him to be an auxiliary bishop in the city where the archbishop was. And when the members of the religious community heard that he was being put in a position of authority, they said, don't do that. He can't handle authority. And then some of them said, well, at least he's not going to be in our hair. They're getting him out of the religious order and putting him in the archdiocese. And when that priest went to that city, he moved to the slums. For 18 years, he lived with the people. For 18 years, he rode the bus with the people and visited them in their homes. For 18 years, he let them teach him about what it meant to be poor and not to have the necessities of life. And they struck fire in his heart. And then he was summoned to Rome. He bought a round-trip ticket from Buenos Aires to Rome, to the conclave, to elect the Pope, and he never used the other part of the ticket, and he was elected to be Pope, and he is Pope Francis. And in some of the first interviews he gave, we knew something was up right away. When he came out to the balcony, and first he said he chose the name Francis. I mean, you know, we picture Francis on those little bird baths holding a little bird and all that. Francis was so radical. Oh God, he was such a troublemaker in the church, okay? And because he's questioning the institutional church, he's questioning the wealth, he's questioning everything. He chose the name Francis, and then when he comes to the balcony, usually what we were always used to is the Pope raises his hand in blessing to bless the people in the world. And here's a Pope who's just elected, and he bows his head and asks the people to bless him. And then he calls himself the Bishop of Rome, not the Supreme Pontiff who's going to hand it down now that I have the authority of God. We're going to be a community together to bring collegiality back and dialogue back into the Catholic Church, to summon us once again to be the people of God who are given God's Spirit. In one of his first interviews, he talked about mercy. The emblem, the motto of his office is, God has mercied me. And mercy has been the theme that he has spoken about from the beginning, as can we all. What is the story of grace in our lives? What is it that we are banking on in God, that we are trusting, that will bring us over into the eternal shores when our time for death comes? What is it that sustains us when we see our loved ones, our mothers, our fathers, those we love, suffering or being brought over into death, sometimes at an early age? What sustains us? What calls us here to worship? The call of God's mercy for us, the infinite love of God for us, which is so great, we can only believe it on good days. Who believes the infinite love of God for us? We believe it and then we lose it. We believe it and then we go, no, that can't be true. Not me. The infinite love of God which is poured out, God's mercy for us. And in one of the first views then, when Pope Francis talked about who he was, they asked him, the question was, who is Jorge Bergoglio? And he said, a sinner. And that's not a metaphorical, that's not a literary phrase. I'm a sinner, but I am one who has experienced God's mercy. And then he talked about Caravaggio's painting that's in one of the churches in Rome of the calling of Matthew. And if you look in America Magazine, in one of the first interviews he gave, he talked about that painting, that calling of Matthew. And so when you look at it, Caravaggio was great with darks and lights in his painting. So you see all these tax collectors sitting around this table. And, you know, they're in their little dressy clothes. You know, they got their little striped pants. They got their little hats with the plumes. The boys are well dressed. And you see Matthew there at the table, and he's hugging on to this bag of gold that he's gotten from his job of being a tax collector. And in the painting, in the front of Jesus is Peter. So you see Peter, he's not well dressed like these guys are. And then right behind him is Jesus, and you see the hand, you see the finger, you see the summons of Jesus to Matthew. And Matthew's like this. And the Pope Francis talked about himself like that, as we all can talk about ourselves like that. God is calling us to be God's ministers of mercy in the world. We're better than all the prisons where 2.3 million people in this country have been exiled into a place of prison where their freedom is taken away, and so often their dignity. They're a number. They're despised. They're treated as disposable human waste. They're treated as non-persons. Are we not summoned to go to them? And Pope Francis, in the Year of Mercy, is calling us to the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, to feed the hungry. My friend Karen Clifton is here, who heads up the Catholic Mobilizing Network to educate Catholics about the death penalty, and she belongs to Trinity Parish there in Georgetown. They have retreats for the homeless at Trinity. When you go to Mass there, the homeless people are there. They're part of the community. And usually homeless people are the people we keep at a great distance. We don't know what to do with homeless people. What are they doing in church? Half the time they don't smell too good. What are they doing in here? Is that not the gospel of Jesus calling us to go out of those ordinary little boundaries where we are, where we hang out a lot with people just like us, and extend ourselves over what Pope Francis calls the gospel of encounter, to go and meet those who don't have our privilege, who don't have our blessings. I found out when I lived with the people of St. Thomas, it's not that I was so bloomin' virtuous. I was so bloomin' cushioned and resourced and protected and given a good education. And here they were suffering with poverty, with the police beating them up. Not every policeman beats up black kids, but it didn't take long to see the racism that was in the police force in New Orleans. And I was unaware of it. I lived in the other world. I lived in the white people's world. I lived in, if my car broke down at 2 o'clock in the morning and a state trooper pulled up behind me, I wouldn't be scared of the state trooper. And every kid in there was talking about their experience. And they're forced to go to crummy schools. So we had this adult learning center where they're coming in, they had dropped out of high school to come get their GED. And here comes a kid. How far did you get in school? Well, I was a junior. And I just think of all the excellent Catholic schools we had in New Orleans, and not saying we shouldn't have excellent Catholic schools, but what most of the kids who were poor, it was the public schools, and here's this kid who was a junior, and I said, well, look, we're going to work with you on each of these subjects individually, and then when you're ready, you can take your GED. So let's start with reading. And he couldn't read a third grade book. And I then thought, God, St. Joseph Academy, the Sisters of St. Joseph, they were such good teachers. They made me want to be a teacher, which I've been doing the rest of my life. My classroom got a little bit bigger because I kind of travel a lot to bring the classroom on the road. Because when in picking up the issue of the death penalty, we pick up the whole gospel. The heart of the gospel is in this issue. The heart of the gospel is in prisons. Because we have been sentencing young people to life in prison. We've been sentencing young people for drug crimes. Drugs were moved from being a misdemeanor to be made a felony, and the massive incarceration of people of color has happened around that. And then when they get out of prison, they go to get a job. Have you ever been convicted of a felony or imprisoned? And they have to say yes, and they can't qualify for public assistance. And so they're permanently disenfranchised, and many are never allowed to vote again for drugs. And so we have to reform it. How do we reform things in a society? Well, Jesus talked about things coming up as wheat and weeds, and Jesus talked about yeast in the dough. And that's us. But you want to know the amazing miracle? Is going to be the mercy that is going to be provided to us. I have received mercy from the 6 human beings I have accompanied to execution. They have taught me. I have watched human beings guilty of doing a terrible crime who walk to their deaths with great dignity, with a prayer to God on their lips. Could I die that well? I do not know. And the victims' families who are teaching us how to heal, how to not to seek retribution. An eye for an eye, a life for life. I think it's such a cruel thing for prosecutors to offer a victim's family that if they wait 10 or 15 years, they'll summon them in and they will get to watch as the state kills the one who killed their loved one. As if the witnessing of violence by the state could ever heal a human heart. Mercy heals our hearts. Love heals our hearts. And the call to us as followers of Jesus is to reach out to the prisoners, but to reach out to victims of violence. God's grace is in our hearts, and it's the gift of belonging to community. Because when we belong to community, our consciousness is always being raised. We're always receiving fresh insights, new ways of doing things, fresh challenges, and comfort when we need it, when we're suffering, when people we love are dying, when there's sickness, when there are hard things. I'm going through that right now in my own life. My sister, 11 and a half months older than me, who's been with me my whole life, she was always the one who could go off the high board and dive into a perfect swan dive. And I'd go off the low board and I looked like the ugly duckling doing the dive. She was always better than me in sports. And she's been such a woman of faith with her family. And in February, she was diagnosed with a glioblastoma. It's a cancer of the brain and it's fast moving. And she's already beginning to slip away. She's still with us. I call her every day and I'm treasuring this time until God's going to take her. The mercy I see of God's grace in this, and I'm being very strong now as I talk to you about that, and about this, and then I crumble because it's, no, not Mary Ann. I can't lose Mary Ann. I always pictured having Mary Ann to be able to go through everything with me and then turn it over to God. And the prayers of the community, I'm asking you for prayers for my sister, Mary Ann, for me, for all of us. The prayers of the community help us. And the way I experience it is, let's just take the next step. We have what we need to take the next step. And so I ask your prayers. I'm very grateful to have a chance to share my faith with you. I wish we all could get up here and each tell our story of God's mercy in our life, which keeps unfurling. It's not done yet. We're still on our way. We pray for the perseverance in our faith and in our love with the community around us. And so thank you for letting me share this with you today. And may God in His mercy bring us step by step, each of us with a unique gift God's given to us. We all don't have to do the public gifts each of us has a gift of God's Spirit in us. And God awakens that in us and calls it forth from us to give it, to experience God's mercy unfolding in us, so then it can flow over to others who in turn will return that mercy to us. Thank you. God bless us.